I did it. Hello guys, and welcome to a Last Epoch feedback post-launch sort of review / feedback video. In this video, I will be going over several topics. We're just gonna have a quick brief look at graphics, audio, campaign, live service items, monos, blessing, UI, and balance. That will be the things I will be going over, some of them more in depth than others. Let's just start out with talking about a previous video, actually, as kind of a baseline. So before the game launched, I made a quick little video about what I expected the game to look like going into 1.0, where I had certain expectations, what I was hoping for and all that. And I will say overall 1.0 met my expectations in most places and probably performed better than I would hope so in the areas where they had really put in the work, which is really positive. So those areas would be graphics, audio. Mainly, I think, is where a lot of their attention to really polish the game went. Less so adding more, like, I mean, there has been added items and 2 new classes. I mean, the 2 new classes, very good, but we'll talk about that. Issues that we expected was, of course, the live service issues, which were plentiful, which should have come to no surprise to anyone if they had been paying attention to the evolution of the game and their previous multiplayer patch and all the hype that was coming, which inevitably led to a massive surge of players. So I can't really be upset about any of those issues. Now, that was the previous video. Now to this one. So graphics, let's just go over them one by one. So I'm just gonna give them a check mark. I think they improved greatly. The game looks good. I think the lighting especially, all the layers. I mean, they went into it in detail of all the different things that they added, that they improved upon going into 1.0, and I think they nailed it. Previously playing the game, I think the graphics were something that was holding me back from enjoying the game and actively pushed me away after a certain amount of time, because there's only like so much. Like, it just looked flat, and it's like drinking a flat cup of coffee. I mean, if it's hot, it's fine, but like eventually it cools down. You're like, time for something else. So graphics, good, great improvements. Just keep it up, honestly. I think it's in the state that, yeah, it's good. Moving on to audio, also good. I definitely feel that there's a lot more atmosphere, a lot more. Audio is one of those things where, especially when you use skills and they connect with the enemy, that the audible feedback really kicks in. That was something that was also lacking prior to 1.0 that is now really good. I'm sure there are certain things that could use some improvement. I think I remember Smelter Strike or whatever. I mean, there's a bunch of places where there's still improvement needed, graphically and with audio, obviously. But overall, as in a package, 1.0, great. I think voice lines of all the monsters that have been added are really funny. And I don't know if that was there before, but there's just enough now to fill the space that you're not constantly hearing your own voice, which I think for some of us is probably good, that you get distracted by the game in a good way. Now, a distraction that is not that great from audio is your character's voice lines. Yeah, those can get pretty repetitive. So I mean, I don't know. I hope that they can sort that out a bit, because that gets kind of, yeah, it gets kind of can get on your nerves a bit over time, your own character's audio. But overall, audio good. Campaign, it is not done. That's just the short of it, honestly. It's something. It's something it's kind of their campaign is something that I really wanted to draw me in, but it still doesn't really. I don't know what it really is, but I will say the cinematics help, but they also can. I think the last one, maybe, or the one before. There's some of them. They can confuse you a little bit as well. I think like it's hard to like follow it with all the timelines and everything. It's better, but it's also with the way we play games these days. And yes, we are spoiled with how we're presented with storylines and like a narrative in a lot of games. But I feel like they could definitely benefit from. I mean, PoE does it really well with its. Where it'll tell you the story as you're moving. I think more of that would be good. That you don't have to just stand at a lot of the times you have to keep standing on the NPC, and you get this. We're just gonna spam through. Click, 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 click. And even if you're trying to listen to it, it's like you really just like you get the feeling you just want to click through it. And I don't know how you solve that, because that's not the same in every game, at least not for me. So I would like to see some improvement there. There's definitely good moments in the campaign. When I got to Majasa again, I mean, that was nice. You definitely feel the shift over, like, when in the cycle they've added all the content. Like, the later stuff definitely feels better than the early stuff. But then they updated some of the early stuff and it looks better, granted. So, yeah. But I would like to see more. One thing about campaign skips, though, because people also want to just skip the whole thing, I think improving the campaign is really key here. And if you want players to skip, let it be an alternative and fun way to play through the rights of getting into endgame. I really hope they don't fall into the trap of just letting people skip the campaign. Because I think the campaign as a tool, but this is my opinion, as a tool is a good way of testing out your new idea, your new character, adding in leveling items and all these things, where it's like, it's an additional experience that adds to the whole of the game. Next up, live service. That was a rough one to start, but I'm not surprised. And anyone trying these days, especially with the amount of hype that can happen around games, when you have live service games, stability of that and not being able to play on day one, I mean, it's a whole communal experience where we're all in it together. And so I think one thing I would say for EHG, I mean, it's good to take critical feedback, and you need it, and you want to improve everything. But the amount of animosity and hate that comes in for people who are wildly uninformed and do not do their own due diligence in researching the product they're going to buy, that's not on you. Like, what is on you is getting everything stable, obviously, and you want to sell a good product. Obviously, Steam reviews and all that is a tough one, because it also determines like where you land within all the different brackets of sales. And I think there's something about if you're not above a certain rating, you actually don't get posted on Steam, and it gets really tough. But yeah, good improvements and timely improvements, I would say. Definitely looks like they've been working hard at it. There's still a lot to do, but yeah, keep at it. Just make it good, and we'll keep playing. Don't worry about that. So one thing I've noticed with the online environment, so it's both nice but also super annoying. So you don't get put into a load screen immediately when you're zoning. However, it puts you in this like state of limbo where you don't know what the f is gonna happen, and you don't know if you're actually going to be teleported at some point, because there's no visual or audible feedback when you click a node often, right? Let's say you stand on the inner time and you click into your monolith, nothing happens. And I had the unfortunate experience of then mistakenly dropping an item, and then I'm trying to pick it up, but I'm in this limbo thing. So I'm in the limbo thing, and then I can still drop items, which arguably is my own fault, but it was a misclick. But the fact that I can while I'm in this limbo thing, and then I'm just gone, and my item was gone, then I can't go back to the old zone either and load into the old instance I was in. So it's like, it's not great. Definitely something to improve. Not sure how, and because it's like being able to look at your character and not be stuck on the load screen is also good when things are slow. But yeah, some jank. Now, for monos, now we're going into more of an endgame perspective here. Monos, corruption. Builds are way too slow. Well, there is, so this is a tough one because there's also balance to consider. And it's balance that's not there yet, but could be there, which would affect how monos feel. Now, one of the reasons why monos feel incredibly slow right now, I believe, is because we have way too much power. A lot of builds are way overpowered. Let's put it that way. That doesn't mean every character is, and if you out there who's watching feel like it's not too fast or not too slow, and your build is not overpowered, that's fine. There will be lots of new players, blah, 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 so on so. But if we're expecting the builds are supposedly, or are supposed to go to 2000 plus, then this is way too slow. Way too slow, because like the difference between, I think, 200, 250 and 500 is it's around a doubling of damage. It might be a little bit more, there might be some, but so let's say going from 250 to 500, if that didn't really provide any additional resistance on your character, and then going from 500 to 1000, which is the next step, and it doesn't really get faster. It slows down slightly because things do have more health. But the rate at which you can complete a mono and get into the next one stays the same, and the amount of corruption that you get stays the same. And so there's this like, the time progression in terms of how long it takes to add the additional amount of challenge compared to your character power, it just slows down and slows down and slows down over time. At least that's how it feels as a player, and I think that's really bad. Also, alts is still horrendous. Oh my lord. Because often you will find items that can create an even stronger character that you are going to re-roll, and now you have to do the whole thing again. And there is no carryover from your previous character to the new character. And so it's a slog. Oh my. Like a good ARPG, I think, really encourages you to make multiple characters and alts. The system goes against that, I would say, currently. I think it's important that you can test your character if you really want to. Like, you can put it to the metal within a reasonable amount of time, and then the difficulty should be a thing that stops you, generally speaking. Now, that can be achieved by limiting player power. Now, I know it sucks. I know that's like, oh no, you can't take away power. It's scary. And it is very scary because players get very upset. But it's kind of the, when you, so this will be a point later down, when you launch a game with this poor balance, because there's very poor balance in this launch. Now, difference in power is also fun to find that and unlock that. I know. But this is what you run into. With the monos, there's another system that is on top of this, which is the blessings. Which I think actually is not too bad on alts, at least. Having to regain your blessings, I think, is a good thing, because it's another way of unlocking player power over time. It becomes an alternate goal outside of just XP, and it's often slower than your XP, which is good because reaching 100 doesn't take too long. And then so you reach 100, and what do you do then? And I think blessings is a good extra thing where you slowly creep up the power through your blessings. I know that they're talking about just having them stored. The most powerful one you had is stored, and then you can swap them. I would caution not having some kind of, do we really want to be swapping blessings all the time? Or should there be some kind of limited resource, right? You could have a memory fragment that you can accumulate. Let's say every 10 monos you get one, and then you can swap one. you would still store the memory of all the blessings, right? So that I think is good, but maybe there needs to be a little bit of attention, so you can't just freely click, 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 click. I mean, it could even just be every one time you go through one, and you can accumulate a lot of them. But I don't know if I like the idea of freely being able to do it all the time. I think overall, actually, I think blessing balance in terms of the options it's all right. Don't have too much to say there. No, actually, I know that in my community people were like, oh, I don't like this, I'm always picking that and not. But I've played a lot of different characters. I have 2 100s and I played 6 or 7 different builds in 1.0. So I have a good idea of like, there's a good variety of how I combine my blessings. Let's put it that way. So I don't think it's, I think it's all right. Let's go to UI. Okay, so UI, when you are playing, here are some things. So these are just things that I think could be improved. Pickup radius sucks. Straight up, it's too small. They realized it in PoE finally, and it's too small here as well. Having to like step on items to pick them up, literally like you feel like you have to trip over it before you're close enough, it's just doesn't feel good. Now there might be all sorts of limitations to why it has to be this way, but yeah. And dedicated pickup button, I'll say it again. D4 did one thing good, which was they had a dedicated pickup button. So it's not all on the mouse, so you can just kind of fade the mouse over and then click a button on the keyboard. I was very surprised how good that felt, but I think it's something a lot of people would appreciate. Cursor size obviously has been talked about. Varying cursor size, being able to swap that, I'm sure that's coming. Shard auto pickup, these things are always being transferred anyways. You click the node. Maybe it's important to have that feedback of I picked up a lot, put it in there. Maybe it's also, maybe I shouldn't pick up everything. So I'll actually say the shard pickup, which is a fan favorite or like a community favorite to want. I definitely see why maybe there's some reasoning to not, but I'm not sure it's a valid argument not to just have it. I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one. It does get annoying, I'll say that. When you play enough, it starts getting annoying, and it's like, shouldn't you have earned? I don't know. It's not the greatest. I think something can be done there. Auto pickup might just be, just maybe it should just be auto pickup. I don't know. For the loot filter, I definitely would like some more options. I think it's like Boolean, it's called. And or if some more conditions there within the filters themselves, so you can make finding the specific thing you're looking for a little bit easier. And then adding LP as an option to, does it have 1 LP, 2 LP, 3 LP? That would definitely be good, because a lot of the end game ends up being, especially if you play COF, you spam out 50 uniques on the floor, and then you have to individually hover over each one of them, and you can't filter. That just seems silly. Now, obviously, this wasn't really a problem prior to COF, but it's a problem now. Add beams, sounds, and icons that you can attach to whatever thing, especially off screen. If there's something very special you're looking for, it drops off screen. It would be nice to see that, not just uniques and sets and so on. Then there is stash options. So the stash is a mess, right? If you're not good at sorting before your stash becomes a mess, searching it just kind of sucks. There's only so many search functions. Maybe I'm stupid, or maybe there's something I haven't figured out yet, but I haven't, and nobody's told me or shown me, or there's been like, oh, you can place it down there and then one up there and then maybe it works a little bit. No, like being able to search for what's currently equipable, or having like multi-search, like gloves with X, like gloves, comma, or like bracket or whatever, int, and it shows you all your int with gloves with int. Something of that nature would be a huge improvement. Because the thing about these games is, and where the fact that we actually have tons of stash space that we can actually search, which is good. Also means that a lot of us are hoarders and we like having a lot of items, but it's also something that inspires people to like make new builds because, oh, I have all these things, I finally put all these things together. Maybe you have like, maybe you're trying to accumulate like 8 different sets of items, and then because of how the game works, you want multiple of exceptional items or exalted items to slam onto potential legendary legendary items, or unique items with legendary potential. So you can't just have one, you have to have multiple. And also because fortune potential, you need multiple, because sometimes the craft you're trying to make fails and you need to make another one. So everyone should essentially hoard to some extent, and so the searching options needs to be adequate for that as well, in my opinion. Keychain for all the keys, because what the fuck, there's so many keys. It sucks keeping them in the inventory, and or if anything, there should be like a move everything to stash, move everything out of stash, like a, that would be nice. Like, as you can move all your shards up, you can move all the keys over or something. I don't know. The keys suck. They're annoying to deal with. Another UI thing would be tooltips. Missing tooltips. Would be nice to have better tooltips. Right, updating the game guide to reflect the actual game. Now, there's a lot of parts in the game. I think dodge comes to mind. When you look at your dodge in-game, you look at the game guide, you look at what it's saying, and there's a mismatch. What am I supposed to believe? Oh, right, and then there's like all the passive tooltips and all these things where it's like, it says it's gonna convert in your passive, and then it doesn't convert on your character sheet. Lots of stuff to do there. There's multiple places where this is the case. And everyone just gets confused. Is it working? Is it not working? This should be fixed. It's very unpolished and it sucks. Then there's all the hover issues with items when they're on the ground, when items are dropping and you're trying to hover something, and enemy health bars not showing and whatever, like all sorts of hover issues needs to be fixed. Buffs not showing off on the bar. I haven't really noticed that too much, but I'm sure it's true. That's some of my community mentioned that. Then okay, so for me, I played a lot of dot builds, a lot of multi-hitting builds. The amount of single instance damage that I don't need to see is kind of like, I'm trying to like figure out, I'm trying to gauge how well I'm doing in terms of damage on one thing, but it gets cluttered by all the other numbers. So like some options to either declutter or make it give me the ability to choose what I want to see and how I want to see it, maybe color coding, I don't know. When I'm playing the game and I'm trying to look at what's happening, I can't really discern how well I'm doing based on the floating text. Many times if I have two multi-hit, like if I build that really multi-hit, and I would say that is kind of the point of having floating text with like pop-ups and all that, outside of just making you feel good when you see the good number. So with all this UI and stash stuff, let's talk about the items, right? So just as a lot of things are not showing up on the tooltip and all this, and we don't know what works, so also with items, there's so many things that don't work or are bugged, or so a way to add content. And if in the future patches you want to add more content, just fix the uniques. Make sure all the items work. Make sure that whenever someone picks something up and they come up with a cool idea, that they can actually actualize that idea and test it and try it. Because putting on an item and it working is really important. Because otherwise you start questioning everything in the game. Does this work? Does that work? And I think there's a lot of that going on right now. Does X thing work? Does that thing work? Is it doing what it's supposed to? Like the fact that there's so many alternate procs that are not properly scaling with like their stat, like int, flame whip, and other things. Also, these alternate stats should, generally speaking, be more scalable, I think. In the Warlock, there is the Witchfire, which I see an attempt to make it really I can't. It's really hard to discern if if it's actually working properly and how it scales. I can't even get a tooltip to actually pop out to see what the Witchfire scales with. I can't. Where's the scaling tags? I need to see the scaling tags so I can see how I can make it better. I mean, they introduced Warlock and then they had the Spine of Maltras or whatever. The whole thing doesn't work. The whips doesn't work. It's like, it's one of those things that even when you market a thing and you make it look really cool and then it doesn't work on, it's really bad. So much content to be had by fixing the items. And just for me, for this one Warlock build, I had the Spine I really wanted to try out, didn't work. Then I tried out the Stygian Beam thing that they finally fixed, that I heard that Rise had figured out didn't work. And that was an item I considered. So I was like, oh, that doesn't work either. Okay. And then we have the bleed into Ignite gloves. They work only for global Ignite, but not the non-global stuff. And that's weird. When it doesn't really allow you to lean into the fantasy that you get when you see the item, that sucks. So allowing the items to essentially give you and lean into a fantasy when you see it is really important. On uniques as well, I think too many skills are defined in terms of power by whether or not there's a unique that fits it. And I think uniques are, some of them can just be raw power, which is fine. I think that's okay. But for the most part, it needs to be, I think it's an alternative playstyle with enough stats to make it so that it doesn't get overshadowed by just an exalted item, for instance. Like, it does need to have enough stats, but that's why we have LP as well. So you have this like alternate way of playing. I do think the game does a good job mostly on this, but yeah, sometimes as well it can be difficult to just make a generic build feel strong without needing certain items, and then they just kind of feel like almost set items. I mean, the low life stuff right now just feels like a set. You need the boots, the chest, and then gloves. I mean, the gloves comes in various ways, obviously, but it's like, it kind of feels like a set. And I feel like, especially on Warlock, you're really pushed into that archetype. And then obviously with current balance on Ward, but we're going to talk about Ward a little bit later, that's also a bit of a problem. As much as there's really good uniques and a lot of uniques, we definitely need more. And there's way too many companion and pet uniques. There's so many classes that just have a lack of uniques. So more uniques, more. Moving on to balance. Right. So we were just talking about classes. Now, balance is shit. I'll just come out and say it. It's bad. And it definitely feels like if you didn't get balanced in the recent year or two, you're probably wildly behind in terms of how the feel and everything. If there was ever a game to like be like, oh, the new thing needs to be the strong thing, I mean, Falconeer, like what the whoop, that's crazy. Like the stats in the Falcon, and I will say, no, okay, so the base attack, when you put your Falcon on and you're just seeing like these like couple thousand hits when you at level 20 or whatever, and you're like, what? Nothing in the game does this much damage at this level. Like, even with like leveling gear, it's like the Falcon just does an obscene amount of damage. So it definitely felt good putting the Falcon on, but you're like, in comparison to what you're gonna run next, kind of sucks when you run the next thing, because you're like, but I had all this power, now I don't. And I think that's where that balance needs to lie in terms of how strong you're supposed to be at certain points. I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, the Falcon also had all the dex. The Falcon has really good scaling, like crazy scaling and fun scaling. I think the sharing stats and all that was really fun. That's a really cool thing. I think companions could definitely benefit, like the companion class, the Beastmaster, whatever, like stuff like that could be really that actually also has some, but like the birds, I'm not, there's probably some other places, but that was really fun. So I think I will say they managed to make it really fun, even though it's also overpowered damage wise, I think. And then again, so many things were bugged. The dive bomb. I just still don't know if I can dive bomb where you replace the birds aren't real note or whatever. I don't know if that works still. I have no idea. The smoke bomb never dissipating. The amount of bugs and I don't want to throw you on the bus here, but it felt a little Volson-like, you know? It's not great. I think that was for a 1.0. I don't know. You can do better. You really can. I felt like it was rushed. There was a lack of QA. That's not the fault of QA, but there was a lack of time to let the QA go through it. Now, do I think the game should have you should have pushed the game launch back? No. I actually think the timing was really good, and I think for the success of the game, you need to have this. Like, you need to hit the right timing, and you need to be smart about it. And I think EHG was really smart about it. I can't critique them for this, but it just means that there's so much work now to be done, especially on balance, because that is, I mean, like, look at Forge Guard. One of the old classes, it just feels old. It really feels like you're playing the game from like years back, which is not a good look. And I'm sure there are other cases. I mean, some of the Primalist stuff as well, and maybe like Sorcerers. And I didn't play I only played 8 classes this time. That's all I got around to. There's a lot of work. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of skills that are just they just lack so much in terms of like being updated to like the current standard of the game. I think that needs to be updated as well. I think melee. I think if you play true melee, oh my god, standing still in Last Epoch, standing still sucks. It really does. There's so many very scary things that you need to dodge out of, and if the requirement for you to deal good damage is to stand still for a slightly extended period of time to ramp up or whatever, it also needs to be reflected in your defensive capability. So I think melee needs to be addressed. Yeah, I think true melee skills needs to have generally like for the most part, they're the ones who need to have the DR, not the range classes that can run around everywhere. They shouldn't be they should have limited tools on when to have DR. Like I think the Warlock right now having so much DR and so many ways to just mitigate damage while being mobile is kind of crazy. Compared to like some of these true melee builds. Like, don't get me wrong, I mean, if you're standing still and channeling, you should have good ways of mitigating, but that should also be reflected in melee builds. Also, melee needs to have a longer range. Like, using Mana Strike is like the most it's just a depressing thing to do. If you don't turn it into a ranged attack, it's just a depressing ability. Like, there's all this stuff you want to do with generating mana and consuming it and spending it and all this, but then how do you generate it? By being the most melee you could ever. It's like, I took all the AoE nodes and I can barely hit 2 monsters standing next to each other. Like, what the fuck? Come on. And I would say even for like pet builds, if invulnerable pet guy flying in the air, Mr. Falcon, good. I think look at the success of that and add that to your other pet classes. I don't think it needs to be this. It shouldn't be this difficult to get your pets back up. I don't know why you need to dedicate so many resources to reviving your companion, especially when the game gets hard. It's like you're spending so many resources reviving it, and then you put yourself in danger. And there's just, yeah, I won't rant anymore on this. I want to see it become better. I'll wait with that one. In terms of playing a character and feeling and the ramping boss DR, I think ramping boss DR, for those who don't know, it's if you deal a lot of damage fast, the damage reduction on the boss goes up. So you can one-shot bosses pretty much, but if you don't do that and you only do like 40% of their life, your damage just plummets, and it takes a long time. So the good thing about this is that outside of the one-shotty things, it kind of it narrows in the it narrows in the range between the top builds and the low builds. Because the top builds, in terms of damage, they'll start doing a lot of damage and then it'll slow down. Whereas the builds that don't do a lot of damage, they're just not doing a lot of damage in the beginning. But then, because they don't hit the DR, they just keep doing the same damage and they die. And it's like, it's a good way of, I do think in the current game, it probably makes a lot of sense, honestly, to kind of limit the disparity between the top damage and low damage builds. But it also feels like a kind of a, it's a bit of a cheap method to achieving that. It's essentially saying we made these things do way too much damage, but it's also a way to allowing the fantasy of doing a lot of damage. So it's like, I honestly, it's a tough one. I do think it's mostly indicative of we gave characters too much damage, I would say. And so how do we mitigate that? I don't know. It's a tough one. But it doesn't feel good when you actually make a character that does a lot of damage and you just slapped in the face with, nah, you're not allowed to. Like, it's weird. Why give me the power in the first place then? It's like weird. Like, oh, this goes on to another point here, which is what does power actually achieve? Like, it obviously makes you feel good, but it's all relative, right? It's relative to what else you did in the past. So it's also, once you give too much power in one place, everything else feels bland in comparison. And it runs the risk of, I mean, the monolith problem is a great example of too much power is bad because it undermines the balance of that system, because you as a player feel like you need to go very high, but the game is not designed for you to go to like 2,000, 4,000, whatever people are reaching now. Because it takes way too long. The scaling feels weird because like double it to actually, and even then that's not even good enough. It's like maybe with the power some classes are exhibiting right now, I mean, maybe you need to like, I don't even know what the number is right now. It's kind of absurd. Like, it needs to be in a realm where you can kind of comprehend, okay, 200 is dangerous, 300 is like, ooh, I have to have a really good character, 500 is like extreme character. Like, those would be like reasonable, but then it's like, some characters struggle at like 100 to 200, and there's like other characters are just having an easy time at like 1,000 to 2,000, and it makes no sense. So I think there's, bringing in good balance is really important for the whole cohesion of the whole system all the way through. Let's see here. So on that note, let's look at the mid-league nerf, or the proposed nerf. So in the beginning, people were like really like, oh, don't do this, don't do that, oh, don't nerf me, oh, you should nerf it, like, what are you doing, devs? And this came right after all the controversy around the launch with all the live service issues. And so I definitely understand how HG was really scared of doing anything, because doing the wrong thing could then lead to another scary moment of Steam reviews and review bombing. So they actually did something really smart. They did a survey. And the survey asked, ranging from, do you strongly disagree or strongly agree with nerfing overpowered and overperforming skills? Yeah, as a statement. And then how do people feel about slightly overpowered? And then the same question but with bugged things. And to no one's surprise, people want to have bugs fixed. But the really smart thing here, which I think is, I think they're managing the community really well here. I think it's very positive to see them being so fast at coming around and finding a way through the muddy waters here. Is that they got the players on their sides by involving them in a process that was, I mean, obviously there could have been players could have maybe thought differently, but it was very unlikely, I think. And bugs should just be fixed, but they got the players to say that the bugs should be fixed. And so now nobody can come back and say, hey, that's not what we wanted, because there's a survey, like 70,000 players saying that that's what you wanted. So I think that was really smart, and I think they ended up doing what should have been done way faster. Because I think this is the problem as well. They weren't in a position where they could immediately just fix, because there were so many other things going on. Like when you have bugs of this magnitude, where it's like a 10-fold increase to a stat, that shouldn't be there. Like it says like the ward stat on the Profane Veil, where it's like you consume a corpse and you get 4% of its life as ward, but then you got 40 in reality and they didn't fix it immediately. Like that's stuff that just needs to be immediately fixed. But given everything that's going on, I can understand why it didn't get fixed immediately. And there might be other things as well involved, and like maybe they, I don't know. I mean, surely it's just a number. Anyways, because so much time had passed, people started wondering whether or not it was something that was supposed to be fixed or not. But now, survey essentially just goes out and says, no, it should be fixed. We want it fixed. The community wants it fixed. We're fixing it. Now they're going through a lot of these like numbers issues where it's like the same thing with Ballista. I think I just read today. It was supposed to give area and not radius. Radius scaling is really scary in any game because if you get like linear radius scaling, it keeps the area grows. I think what do you call it? Like it's quadratic scaling. So for every radius, you get 4 times the area, or something like that. So it gets ginormous. Like people had full screen AOE, and you're not supposed to have that because the game is not supposed to be like a one-click button game. At least not if you're looking at their philosophy from the inception of the game. So I think they're taking steps here now. Now, one thing that's still left is when it comes to all this balance and all that is ward. Like Profane Veil was like the big one. It's like people saw the ward number. They saw like 200,000. It was like when live characters have maybe 4,000. That's crazy. So I think going forward, ward is a hugely problematic thing. It was before the launch, we knew it was problematic. There were so many builds that completely trivialized the game through ward. I think Rune Master was one of them. And even with the nerf, I was like, it's probably still gonna be broken. And it was. It's just way overpowered. I think some of the problems is that the recovery in the game needs to be strong. Which means that if you're using ward as a resource, the ward recovery needs to be strong. However, there's a stat that essentially multiplies your recovery into your health pool, which is retention. And since there's no cap, and since ward often scales with, so the thing is, ward isn't just like, it's not just you're always getting the same ward, so getting retention is like with health. Okay, so with health, you're getting a static amount of health. There's only so many places you can get it. And there's no, you can't get ward or health on a skill. Like a skill doesn't give you max health the more you use it. However, skill balance works differently because you can stack cast speed, attack speed, all sorts of ways where you can make a skill generate more of that stat. And then you have ward retention coming in on top. And ward retention, the numbers we get on ward retention right now are just way too high. They're way too high. Int scaling as well is really, it's an odd thing because there's so many ways to scale int now, like the strength to int and just the int, and it's a main damage stat that also gives you a multiplicative health increase. It's not just flat like vitality is. No, it's a ward multiplies the amount of EHP, or like total health you get. I'll say health because ward's, well, let's just say ward. It gives you a multiplicative increase to your ward in most cases. I think one stat I noticed that they have started introducing, which is way better than retention, is decay. The ward decay essentially sets a threshold which is static, which is linear, which it diminishes over time in terms of its effectiveness, and I don't think ward retention does. If you look at the low life builds that currently are playing, if you get 3000 life and you put, with no ward retention, you put low life gear on, I think you stay around the same number. You go a little over. Right. So if we look at a ward build with, let's say you have the nice items, you have 50% conversion, right? You have the current health loss per second, missing health gain per second as ward. If you get that to 50% and you have 3000 life to begin with. Now, what happens here is that you take all the best life nodes which are all suffixes. You stack your life pool to 3000. Now the way you get ward retention, which is what you're converting your life into now, is mostly on prefix. Well, it's on prefixes and like idols and passive tree and the gloves, which can be improved by cold res, which has various ways of getting there as well. At very, very high numbers. Let's just say like those gloves need to be nerfed, by the way. But baseline with no ward retention, you're hitting 3,700. You're getting 700 more life at the very end. Now, I will say this health pool is not as good as the max health. That's about this, because like it doesn't take into account endurance, and it's a much harder resource to regain if you're just regaining it this way. However, if you had 100 int, which also gives you damage, that's 400 retention. And just with 100 int, this build goes to 11,200 stable ward. So you just multiplied your health pool of 3,000 by 4 just by getting 100 int. That is absurd. That makes no sense. Now, I think ward retention needs to be absolutely controlled and lowered. Ward decay needs to be put in place in way more spaces. Like let's assume that int no longer gave ward retention, but it gave 20 threshold. Now that would give you 2,000 threshold. I'm not sure if this is the best way, but then that would put you at a stable ward of 5,700 rather than 11,000. Or you could have it, you could half the retention and then you would get to 7,400. Maybe halving the retention on int might be the right way. But all I can say right now is the current ward retention, it just makes no sense. Because there's another key to this, which is, oh, why not just lower the recovery of ward? Why go off after the retention? I mean, with low life, retention is one of the big kickers, because that's why it's so it multiplies your base life again. It's like you have all the health you have the health and the health multiplication, and then the retention becomes another multiplication. So you have three different multiplicative stats that you're increasing at the same time versus just 2. Whereas I don't think it's good to have many. I think it's good to have just one. Like the increased health makes sense. Also, you could argue like endurance maybe is somewhat of this, but like that's very limited. Yeah, so I think there's a big problem with ward right now. A really important thing here though is that you actually need to be able to generate ward really fast, because it needs to be a comparable stat to something like leech and regen, because the game does throw a lot of damage at you at times. But the thing is, once the health pool goes too high all the time, then you can constantly buffer yourself and never get one shot and never actually get in danger, because you can a lot of skills in the game, a lot of bosses are designed around having really strong abilities, but when your health pool goes too high, it mitigates the entire danger. If you just have a lot of recovery but not a lot of health pool, then if you take the hit, maybe you survive it, but then you're very low and you're in big danger. So I think the ward regeneration is less of a problem. I mean, healing hands should definitely not, in my opinion, shouldn't scale from healing effect, as that has nothing to do with ward. It's for healing. I mean, you can, but then now we're healing the ward, but I feel like healing and leeching versus ward are different. They're like conceptually different things in terms of like how they should interact with the game, in my opinion. You could introduce something if you want to bridge the gap, however, in a different way here. Could be overleech, overheal, turning into endurance threshold. So let's say that I don't know how this would manifest itself, but I could see some kind of mechanic where you would leech. It's essentially the inverse of the losing all your life from low life. You could have a mechanic where you gain life and then it overflows into threshold, but that would always be capped. by your total life pool. So even that, if you had that ability, it would actually be weaker than ward is right now, because there's no cap on ward. So that's kind of my ward rant here at the end. Overall, 1.0, I would say the game's out there now. It is still a fantastic game to get your hands on. Yeah, I put a lot of stuff forth here in terms of balance and all that, but if you are not at that level, if you're not at the end game yet and you're still just getting your grips on the game is fantastic as a ARPG to explore skill design, items, and all that. So I think the places where the game excels, it still excels. It's fantastic, has fantastic skill design, crafting, like all those systems working well together. So still a fantastic game there, but there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm excited to see what that's going to look like, future cycles. I'm hoping there's not going to be a distraction with trying to push out pinnacle bosses and such with balance of this nature in the game, because it runs the risk of immediately getting trivialized or other classes being completely left out, and you're gonna run into this like weird meta where you only play one thing and people are just gonna get bored because, oh, it's always this build, and then they're gonna want more pinnacle bosses because there's still not enough to essentially test their characters with because they're way overpowered. Anyways, game is great regardless of all the balance issues, and I can't wait to come back and try it again in the next cycle. So yep, that's it for me. Thanks for watching.